Okay, so we're in Perek Vav Halacha Yud. Last time before Rosh Hashanah, we did Perek Tes, which was about prosbos. So we don't have that much more. We just have the rest of Perek Vav and Perek Zayin and Perek Ches. So Perek Vav Halacha Yud. Demei Shvias and Kohen Mehem as a hope. You're not allowed to use Shmitta money to pay an obligation. So let's say someone bought vegetables or fruit, let's say fruit, in a permissible way from someone else. So the money that was used in the transaction now has sanctity of Shmitta. You can't use that money to pay off a debt. The only thing you could do with it is to buy food, and you're going to eat that food with sanctity of Shmitta. Beinos and mehem shushvinos. You can't use that money for shushvinos, was a special. Nowadays, I guess you would call it a batch to pay for a bachelor party, but Shoshvinan were very good friends that would really help their friends get ready for the wedding. So you can't use this. So people would pay for each other. You know, if you paid for Shmerel would pay for you. So you can't use that money to pay for Shmerel's wedding. And you can't, pay back a favor with it. And you can't pledge money, this Shemitah money even for charity, for tzedakah, for poor people in the shul, which is, I guess, where they used to hang out. But you're allowed to send from the Shemitah money for Gemilas Chesed, but you have to inform the recipients of those items, that those items have kedusha of Shemitah, and therefore the stuff that they use it for has to be eaten with. They can only buy food, human food with it, food for human consumption. They have to treat it with special sanctity. And similarly, you're not allowed to buy servants or land or treif non-kosher animals, because those are not things that we could eat. If you did buy it with them, then you have to spend an equal amount and buy proper food with them, just like you do with Meiser Sheni. So Meiser Sheni is the second tithe in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shmitta cycle. You have to take a second tithe and then bring that up to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. If it's too hard to schlep it to Yerushalayim, you can redeem it onto a minted coin, and the sanctity transfers to a minted coin. And when you get to Yerushalayim, you buy, again, food for human consumption with that money. So if you bought something that you can't eat, like you bought a servant, or a slave, or you bought a non-kosher animal, that can't become Meiser Sheni, so you have to then buy something else for the same amount for Meiser Sheni. You're not allowed to use Shemitah money to buy birds for the Zav or Zava, or or the childbirth korban, or sin offerings or guilt offerings. And if you did, you have to spend the equal amount and consume those items with sanctity of Shemitah. And you're not allowed to. So let's say, Mike, if you get a new baseball glove, so one of the things you do, you rub oil in it to break it in. So you're not allowed to rub in Shemitah oil into pots or leathers. So there are certain types of pots that they're flavored pots, so they rub some type of thing in it. So you're not allowed to use Shemitah oil and produce for that stuff. If you did, you have to. There's nothing you do. You don't have to destroy the thing it's saying, but you have to spend an equal amount of money for proper food that you could eat for Shemitah. So Rav Kook says you're even not allowed to redeem captives with Shemitah money. So even though redeeming captive is in the Gemara in Bava Basra, near the beginning of Bava Basra, you could even sell a shul to redeem captives, but you're not allowed to use Shemitah sanctified money to redeem captives. But you could give it to the council of the city, who makes important city decisions. And it appears from the Radvaz on this, the commentator to the Rambam on this halacha, that you're not allowed to give it, to the chaver, to the city council who has special powers. So it means when we say city council, in this case, we don't mean the alderman. We're not talking about crooks, but there's certain halachas in the third or fourth chapter of Megillah of certain things. Certain decisions can only be made by the city council, and that would be certain things like possibly selling a shul or something like that, or a cemetery, things like that. So there's a machlokas whether you're allowed to give Shmitta money to them and inform them. So according to the Sefta, it's okay. According to the Radvaz, you're not allowed to. And that which the Rambam says, if you bought slaves or real estate or non-kosher animals from Shmitta money, you have to then buy other food worth the same amount and treat that like it has sanctity of Shmitta. That means you have to spend money out of your own pocket, and said whoever I bought, if I bought real estate or if I bought the non-kosher animal, whatever monies I had bought, so those monies never were released from their sanctity of Shmitta. So you have to say that those coins, that currency now becomes nullified, it becomes regular, and the sanctity that was on those coins now is transferred to these coins that I'm about to spend. So basically, you have to transfer the sanctity from those money onto your money, and that's only when you can't track down the seller. But if you know where the seller is, you have to force him to give you the actual coins that you spent, and then you would give him obviously regular money that didn't have Kedusha Shmita, because that's an interesting fact about it, that the Kedusha Shmita is literally on the money. The coins itself has a thing. Now we didn't see this in regard to Shmita, but in regard to Meiser Sheni, there's a special halacha that this money only transfers to a coin that's minted. But there were certain types of coins in those days that were not minted, and they're in the Gemara, they're called asimon. So actually, I think in the 70s, it was before my time, but it wasn't super long ago, the tokens for the payphones in Israel were called asimonim, which is the same word. But so in halacha, that means a non-minted coin, but it has value, but it's not a minted coin. So I have not seen anyone say that the Shmita sanctity only transfers if you buy something, it needs to be a minted coin. That's a halacha we know by Meiser Sheni, but I haven't seen anyone say that applies to Shmita money. So credit cards I'm leaving alone, but let's say paper money, if paper money would have the same status of an asimon, I don't know. So it certainly wouldn't be good for Meiser Sheni, but maybe it would be okay for Shmita. If you would buy Shmita produce with paper money, the sanctity would go into the paper money. We know it certainly wouldn't work for Meiser Sheni, but again, I never saw that halacha applied to Shmita. And I've mentioned before that for whatever reason, the people who use Otzer Beis Din, they use some type of prepaid debit cards, and even though, so I don't know if it's to not have the problem of money with Kedusha Shmita. That's probably the reason why they do that, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, now what if you drank wine that you had bought with Shmita money? So in that case, the Rav Kook says the practice was that first you would drink and then you would pay. So normally you would have to buy the wine or buy the item, the food item, before you consume it. But here, if you already drank it, it was already consumed. So what do you do? So it's good to tell the shopkeeper, give me the wine and I'm holding on to these money. So then even though you haven't handed over the money until after you drank it, it's as if that you gave it over to the storekeeper. So the sanctity went to the coins, you drink the wine, and the storekeeper now has, and And I guess now that money, meaning you had Shemitah money and you were buying food with it. So the sanctity was going to transfer from the money to the wine. So by doing this, when you drink the wine, the sanctity moves from the coin to the wine, and then the coins are now regular money. They do not have sanctity of Shemitah anymore. So when you give them the coins, they are now regular coins, and it's not considered paying an obligation or a debt with Shemitah money. And it impairs if it's an important person that he's believed, it's enough to pay him afterwards without telling him beforehand, this is the Shemitah money that I'm going to pay you with. Okay.
Isn't it like going to a restaurant and paying with Shmitta money then?
So I think so. The problem is that, so if it's a good question, because I mean, and my first reaction would be that it depends. If when you go to a restaurant, and maybe Ira would be able to tell us better, are you paying for food or are you paying for service, or some combination thereof? Because if you're paying for service, you would not be allowed to use Shemitah money for it, but if you're paying for food, you would be. So probably should not use Shemitah money for a restaurant, but that's a very good point you bring up, Larry. Yud Aleph. Ein nosnim mehem lo levalon v'lo levalon v'lo l'sapar v'lo l'sapan v'lo l'shar umnin. You're not allowed to give Shemitah money to the person at the bathhouse, and not to a barber, and not to a sailor for if you're buying passage on his ship for a ticket. So we would call that a bus fare or plane fare, v'lo l'shar umnin, and not to any other professional workers. But you could give it to, you could use Shemitah money to the person who's bringing water up from the well to give you a drink. You're allowed to give Shemitah money or Shemitah produce to workers as a gift, meaning you're not allowed to give it to them to pay off what you owe them. But to give it as a gift, that's not prohibited, as long as those people are reliable that they will use it with Shemitah sanctity. Okay, so Rav Kook quotes the Bartanura in the 8th chapter, Mishnah Hay, that even if you owe wages to a worker, and if by virtue of you giving them a gift from Peirush Shvius, then they're not going to ask you for their wages anymore, that is also a mutter. So even though it's kind of a roundabout way of giving them their wages, the Bartanur says it's okay, because it's as if, because there is a halacha there in the 8th chapter of the Mishnah, not the 8th parak of the Rambam, but in the 8th parak of Mishnah, that you're allowed to give Peirush Shvius as a favor. So since he worked for you, you give him this favor, it's considered a favor, but it's not considered paying a debt with it. But is this
Fancy?
Yes.
So when I was in Israel, there was some Shemitah produce in the store. Isn't it a stretch then to expect anybody buying it to treat it with the correct sanctity?
It would be a stretch. I think if the stores in Israel, well, at least what I remember, the shuk, or even makolets in the religious neighborhood, they would always say what the Shemitah status was of the produce that they had. They would say if it was from a non-Jew, they would say if it was Oter based in. Well, I don't know about Oter based in. They would say
I'm saying it's labeled. It's labeled Shemitah produce, and if you get somebody that doesn't care or doesn't know, you get a non-Jew, walk into the grocery store, buy it, and then they eat half and throw out half.
Oh, that's your question. Oh, okay. I misunderstood the question. So yeah. I was saying from the other perspective, because we learned before that you're not allowed to, you can't even buy from someone who is not going to treat the money with proper sanctity. So you're talking about if you're a store owner, how do you know that the person coming into your store is actually going to keep the
Right.
produce? So I mean, it's a good question, and part of the real halachas about selling the Shmitta produce is when it's allowed to is you're only selling them a little bit. So since you're only selling them a little bit, I guess, and I guess we'd have to ask someone from the Rabbanut or from any of the Hachsherim, is that we assume that since we're giving them a small quantity, they are going to use it properly and they're not going to waste it.
Oh, okay,
Meaning,
that's true.
A not perfect analogy, but you're not allowed to make milchik bread. The only heter to make milchik bread, one opinion is you only make a very little bit at a time, so it's not going to be left around and someone might mistakenly eat it with fleishiks. That's not going to happen. Or some say it could be a little bit bigger, but it's a special shape. And that's why in Israel, the milchik berekas, the cheese berekas are triangular. So everyone knows that triangle berekas are milchik. And then Rav Aaron's father was of the opinion that said if you had a wrapper on it and the wrapper said dairy on it, that was okay also to make a milchik pastry, I guess, or bread. So at least with the wrapper, that's not as good. But according to the opinion that you're allowed to make milchik bread if it's very small, so you're not going to have any left over, you're going to eat it all at one time. That's a kind of a similar thing. It may not be exactly the same, but it's a similar thing. You're only selling them a little bit of fruit, so we're not worried that they're going to that they're going to waste it or whatever. Now, in reality, do they have limits on how much they sell? I'm not sure. Okay, and then Rav Kook is mentioning, I'm not sure who this commentary is, but some commentary, Lamed Heishin, in the Mishnayos, that whoever's obligated, if you owe someone if you owe them money or even wages from the fact that you're giving them a gift, and then they're not, by giving them this gift, they're not going to ask for their salary. This is literally paying your debt with Shmitta produce, and therefore it's usher. So this opinion argues with the Bartanura that Rav Kook cited at the beginning of this halacha. And it doesn't matter if you say, I'm giving this to you as a gift, it's not for your salary, not for your wages. And even though you know that they're not going to ask you for your wages, that doesn't count. That's just, it's a trick that doesn't really work. And the only way that it would work to give it as a gift or by the favor is only if you give the gift a long time before it would be used up, and also they don't have the intention that you're benefiting from it for the wages, even though you know that later this worker is going to work for you for free because you gave him this gift. So meaning, according to that opinion, you'd be able to give a laborer a gift, but that's only if you give it to him before you have him do the work. And at some time, it doesn't say exactly how long, but at some time before you would have him do the work. Okay, next he quotes the Beis Yisrael from the Pasuk Shulchan, that which it is permitted to give Shmitta produce to who is this? The guy from the bathhouse or the ditch digger? Because the Mishnah talked about giving it to a ditch digger, I think, to give him for a drink. That's only if you're giving a drink only to him, but you're not allowed to pay him if he's giving drinks to other people through Peish Shvius. Meaning, if the guy who's digging a ditch, you could use Shmitta produce to give him a drink, but not for him to give other people drinks. And the Rash, the commentary on the Mishnah, says that as long as it's to feed people, it's okay. But it would be usher if he was, let's say, feeding, like, because he's a worker. So now, nowadays workers come with their pickup trucks, but then if they would come with their mule or whatever, he wouldn't be allowed to use that for his animal or for, to clean his uniform with, things like that. So it's interesting, things like that today, your fuel costs for your pickup truck, so that would be the food for his mule or water for his mule. And just to give a uniform, so he couldn't use that money to clean his clothes with, etc. And it appears from the Radvaz that For the ditch digger, he'd be allowed to feed his animal, to give drink to his animal, but not for anything else. So it's a little bit in the middle, because it's he only drinking for himself, but not for others. But his animal, just to drink for his animal, that's okay, but not other uses, not other expenses that he has incurred in connection to his ditch digging. Okay, we should be able to finish the parak in a few minutes. Now, halach yud beis. Ha'omer lapal helach iser zavalaket liyar kayom. Schara motorvenu could make shvius. If you tell a worker, here's a coin, and please gather me vegetables for today. So that's, you're allowed to, the money that he gets for that is not considered, doesn't have Shmitta's sanctity. He could spend whatever he wanted on, meaning if he doesn't have to buy food with it. If he wants to buy a book, he could buy a book. If he wants to buy, a shirt, he could buy a shirt. Below kansu apol lios could make shvius. And we don't punish the worker to treat it like it's Shmitta produce, that he shouldn't have picked vegetables for this money. So this is part of this is semantics. If you worded it, gather me for this money today, vegetables, then you're very clearly stating that this money is in exchange for harvesting Shmitta produce. So therefore, the money does have sanctity. And the worker is only allowed to buy human food with this money. So Rav Kook quotes the Kesef Mishnah. Again, the Kesef Mishnah is one of the Red Vaz are the two main commentaries on the Rambam. The Kesef Mishnah is also the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Kesef Mishnah says on this halacha that this is talking about if you asked him to pick something which you're allowed to eat. So we saw a few chapters ago the very intricate laws of Svichen, of the seeds and vegetables that may have grown themselves, but maybe not. So this is only talking about things that you're permitted to pick. That these are vegetables that people don't plant. Either they're in a place that don't plant, or they're a species that people don't plant. So we know they definitely grew themselves, because we learned several months ago, I think 3 chapters ago, that because there was, in order to dissuade people from planting things and claiming, oh, it grew by itself, the Chachamim had to forbid these vegetables that were likely to have been planted. So it's only something that what wouldn't have been planted, that doesn't have a prohibition of svichen. Then that's when this halacha applies. But if you said pick me cucumbers, well, we know people plant cucumbers, so therefore cucumbers would be forbidden because of svichen. So then the sages fined or punished the laborer that he's not allowed to use this money, because he was punished for doing an improper or prohibited thing with it. And Rav Kook says it appears that even if you would have brought a lot more, so what happens if he got something that was allowed, but he brought such a large quantity, so that makes it as if it's not allowed. Because if you get too much stuff, it looks like you're the owner of the field, not just someone who's taking from something ownerless. What about that? So Rav Kook says that in that case also the amount of money, he'd be allowed to keep the money, and the Chachamim didn't punish him for violating the rules of picking too much stuff, because he's not paying him for the vegetables, he's only paying him for his labor of gathering, and his laboring wage does not fall under the category of the Shmitta produce if you worded it in the proper way. But if he said, I want you to get this large quantity, which is a prohibited quantity, in that case, it appears, says Rav Kook, that he would not be allowed to use his money, because if they made a deal which was to do something that was usher, the Chachamim punished them and didn't let them have any benefit from that money. Okay, halacha yud gimel. Hachamarim ha'osim b'per shvius melacha shvius asura. If donkey drivers use perishvius for prohibited things, such as they took more produce than one family would need. Then their laborer for instead of renting rent a car in those days, you might rent someone with a donkey and a cart. So if you hired them to do something that was prohibited malacha and shmita, like you gathering too much stuff, then the amount that you paid them, the rental fee, the way we would call it rental car, that would be like you were paying them for improper, illegal shmita work. And this is a fine. The Chachamim punished them as a fine. It wasn't asur midiraisa. So how come the Rambam says, why did the Chachamim punish the donkey drivers for the rent-a-cars, but they didn't fine the workers themselves who picked the stuff? Lo kansuba mishum kidei chayav. Because the laborer who picks the thing gets a very small wage, and he literally needs it to live. Rav Kook quotes from a Tosfos and Avodah Zarah, Daf South Beis Amid Beis, that even if these donkey drivers did a permitted work, like they brought the proper amount, they didn't pick too much, it's still asur, because normally the donkey drivers have a much bigger profit margin than workers, so their labor is more considered like a service charge, not just wages for picking. So we mentioned a few minutes ago, when you buy food at a restaurant, you're not and in regard to the restaurant, I'm pretty sure that restaurant you're not buying food. Maybe part of what you pay for is food, but a lot of it is service and the ambiance, et cetera, et cetera. There's a famous story that Rabbi Salanter, the founder of the Muslim movement, went to a tea shop or a coffee shop in Paris and ordered a cup of tea, and they charged him like $5 for it. And he said, it's just water and leaves. What's you charging $5? So basically, do you see the chair that you're sitting on? Do you see the nice pictures on the wall? Basically saying you're paying for the atmosphere, not just for the water that you're drinking. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, I forgot what he used it, but he used that in an example of something in a Musar Shmuz. But so I'm sure in a restaurant, only part of the amount of money that you pay in a restaurant is for the food, and part of it is for the service, et cetera, et cetera. So they're saying that hiring a laborer to pick something, that's just to pick. But a donkey driver, that's more than just a wage for him. That they're considered more of a merchant already. So just the fact that I could say that a restaurant is more than just food, we see an analog here that the donkey driver is more than just providing doing labor. It's more of a service, or it looks like it's more like he's acting more like a businessman of selling stuff, not just the laborer who's just literally giving you the stuff that he just picked. It's more considered of a sale of something going on. Also, we said before that in the previous halacha that this labor isn't selling the produce, you're selling his labor. And so the donkey driver, it's more than just selling his labor. So it's a slightly different distinction than the first thing I said, but those are two possible distinctions between to explain the Rambam's to explain this Tosfos, that there's a difference between the donkey driver and the laborer who picks the stuff. Yodalet halokech min anachtam kikor bepundion. Ve'omer lo b'shas lakita shalakit yirakosad avilcha bo harei mutter. If you bought from a baker, so this is important because you're not buying from a loaf of bread from a private individual, but you're buying from a baker for a loaf of bread that has a certain cost for it. And you said, when I gather vegetables, so when you take the loaf of bread, you said, when I gather vegetables, I'm going to give you some vegetables for this, then the baker's allowed to take it. It's not considered paying a debt with Shmita produce. However, since you're doing this in that barter way, the loaf of bread now has sanctity of Shmita, in exchange for the Shmita produce that you're going to be giving him. But if you bought it from the baker without making this condition of when I pick vegetables, I'll give you some of those vegetables for this bread. You're not allowed to pay the baker with that Shmita money because you can't pay a debt from Shmita money. And once you took it, plain, it's some sort of debt, and you're not allowed to pay debt with Perush Shvius. So what has to be understood, and I don't have an answer for this right now, is that we learned that Hakafas Achanos is not considered, no, that was a different halacha. But what I was thinking of is that we learned in regard to the prosbul stuff that, but that's why it's different, because that's talking about prosbul, it's not talking about Shemitah produce. But that halacha was, if you buy from a shopkeeper on credit, Shemitah doesn't cancel store credit. But if the store credit has been transferred into a line of credit and now it's like a loan, then Shemitah does cancel that. So that's not analogy. So that was talking about buying on credit, but that's a little different than this, because that was in regard to Shemitah canceling a loan. That wasn't talking about paying for it with Shemitah produce. Rav Kook says on this, the fact that you're allowed to give him Shemitah vegetables in exchange for the loaf of bread, that's only when you use a lashon of certainty. I am going to bring you vegetables. So then the baker is relying on those vegetables, and therefore it's like you're trading. So you're allowed to trade stuff like this. But if you said it is a lashon of doubt, if I get vegetables, the Shemitah vegetables I'll trade you, then the loaf of bread has become an obligated. The value of the loaf of bread is a for sure debt, and now to pay him with the vegetables is considered paying off a debt with vegetables. So Rav Kook is saying that the words here, you have to say specifically, I am going to pay you off. This halacha is only applicable when you say I will pay you off with Shemitah produce. Tezvav, Ochel Perush Shvius B'Tova V'Shlo B'Tova. You're allowed to eat produce of Shemitah as a favor and not as a favor. So B'Tova Ketza, what does it mean you're going to eat it with a favor? Shitin Lo Perush Shvius K'moshe Asim Lo Tova Shnas.
Hey, Lauren.
What? We're 15.
What?
We're reading 15 on the screen right now. So meaning someone did you a favor. I don't know. They let you. You couldn't find you lost your button off your shirt, and they let you thread and a needle and a button. So you can give him Perush Shvius equal to the amount of the favor that he did for you. Or you can invite him into your garden to eat as if he did you a favor. But if someone gave you Shemitah produce as a gift, or if you got it as an inheritance, so lo aleinu, but someone's father had this produce and he passed away, so now his son inherited it. The halacha is that you have to treat those vegetables as if you gathered them from the field yourself. So Rav Kook says the Ravid, and Tosfos Shantz and Edio says you're only allowed to eat Perush Shvius with the permission of the owner of the field, even though according to the Torah the field is considered ownerless and anyone's allowed to go in there, and you're allowed to go there and there without permission. But the Chachamim said that you shouldn't be accustomed to eating someone else's stuff without his permission during the other years. So Shemitah also, you should have permission of the field owner to go in there. So it seems simple that the halacha would be that the owner of the field has to give you permission, but he's not allowed to say no to anyone to eat during Shvius. So obviously you have. So he's basically saying you have to ask permission, but he has to say yes. That's what Rav Kook is saying. And you're not allowed to hold back from anyone to eat from your field on Shvius. And it appears that according to this opinion, what happened if the Balabayas didn't give permission to someone, even though he did something wrong, and he is transgressing the positive commandment of the fruit being ownerless, but the other person is not allowed to go in there anyway, despite not having permission. And the Ran in the 5th chapter of Gemara Vodazara says you're allowed to accept sub-market value for Peir Shvius. So let's say if it's, these I don't know, these potatoes are worth $2, you could take $1.50 for them, because by the fact that you're paying sub-market values, it's recognizable that they're ownerless, but you're just giving the Balabayas some money for his kindness in letting you use his field. So to pay for that is not considered paying for Shmitta produce. That's considered that he did you a favor, so you're giving him something for the favor, but it's not payment for Shmitta produce. So this is the end of the 6th chapter, and God willing, we will start the 7th chapter next week. Time, I'm still not sure for next week, but we're likely going to be something similar to this. Any questions? Hey, Yashkach, it's been a few weeks because of Yom Tovim. In the fast days, more specific, first is the fast days, and then this Chol Hamoed. So Baruch Hashem, we're able to get back into